Artificial intelligence is rewriting the rules of work. Routine tasks are no longer just automated, they are disappearing. And what's left is our innate drive for purpose and meaning. Welcome to TIDES. I'm your host, Shveta Malhan, and today we are exploring how people can flourish when AI reshapes the world of work. My guest today is Gordon Sandford, partner digital transformation and future ready workforce and lifelong learning at EY. Gordon has guided organizations through major technology shifts and is passionate about helping individuals find purpose and meaning beyond the traditional 9 to 5, especially now that AI is taking on more and more of our routine tasks. Welcome to Tides, Gordon.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
All right, Gordon, let's start our conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion with you by framing AI's impact on work. So from your experience, what has been AI's most profound impact on employees' daily routines and sense of role at work? What's your observation like?
Yeah, if you permit me to take like a small step back, and what I'd say is like when you're my age, there's a few things I know to be true. These aren't predictions. Technology's evolving at a rapid clip, an increasing clip, sort of Moore's law is holding true. Every once in a while, a series of technologies conspire to create a broader business revolution. In my lifetime, I've lived through 4 of those: distributed computing, .com, digital, now AI. What I will say is each one of those revolutions is happening at a more like quicker clip. The time to full adoption is faster and the impact is broader. It's further democratizing IT. So the one thing I'll say is like that's 100% predictable that will keep going. So while AI is the current thing that we're dealing with, there will be something, and it will be relatively soon. I don't really feel like we've properly adapted to the digital era yet, and we're deep into AI era, but the next one are coming. My guess is it'll be something around edge computing, quantum computing, IoT, and AI will really change things again. So AI is doing that. It's further democratizing IT. It's making it simpler, and it's providing us with a lot of capability. I would say on the positive side, I think the impact of AI will be much, much bigger than what we'd seen before. As a digital leader, I kept saying to people, digital is going to change the world. And I think it did. It created a new normal. I think AI is going to be probably orders of magnitude bigger than that. What we're seeing is a whole lot of interest in discovery and a little less application. There are formal applications, usually in the back office, to take mundane activities in, say, the finance process or the call center and use those to automate them. And then there are increasing activities around sort of everyone's day-to-day, using it to summarize vast amounts of information, helping with research. Those kinds of things are like pretty much ubiquitous and happening already. But I still feel like there's a bit of resistance to the power of AI and to understanding it and getting to know it. Of course, there are limitations. There's hallucination, and it's only as good as sort of the data set it's operating off of. But to the point you made before about removing a lot of the mundane tasks and providing us an opportunity to provide bigger, more value-added activities, I think it's fulfilling that promise. I think the biggest challenge is a people change management challenge. And I think most of the narrative has been around, look at all the great things AI can do and look how it can automate things for you. We need to spend more time on the narrative, which is, and how do I help you prepare for the world that will be and make sure that you have the skills and competencies to flourish in that world? Unlike sort of, say, RPA, where we automated a lot of processes, mostly people then watch the automation. We didn't prepare them for the activities they could be doing now that these mundane tasks are over. And so that is something that I think we really need to focus on, is like, how do we prepare people with the skills and competencies they need when these mundane things are happening in an automatic fashion? So I think those coming together will really unlock the power of AI. But I think the promise is proven. It's an adoption, awareness, change management issue right now, in my view.
Yeah, and to your point, the change that we are experiencing today, I mean, yes, it's new in the sense that this time the change is because of AI. The first seismic change we witnessed was when internet came in our lives.
Right.
The second was when we moved from on-prem to cloud. So we as human species in the context of work are used to change. I really want to double click on the resistance and adoption side of things, because we used to changes, but why is there so much fear and resistance to AI this time around?
Well, I have 2 theories on that. And one was when COVID occurred, when you have some sort of big event like that, I feel like we lost a lot of the interesting good things that happened out of COVID. Lots of
Mhm.
tough things happened, right? Lots of really hard. First of all, there was the loss of life and health, but then there was the loss of connectivity, to try to transition to hybrid work. All these things were hard on people. But what I thought was really great about COVID was we showed that humans and people can react to this big change and still flourish.
Yeah.
We did it really fast. I had been talking about hybrid work or distributed work ever since, we were moving to a more globalized model and we had different workforces in different countries that had different rates. And that was very hard to do. And then all of a sudden, overnight, everyone adopted it. So I think it's unfortunate that we seem to have lost that lesson learned, that we can adapt pretty quickly. I think change is hard.
Mhm.
And my perspective is anytime you're processing change at any level, whether it's like my regular meeting went from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Like that's not massive, but it's different. Anytime you're processing any change, it requires a cognitive load. It requires some of your energy to process that change. And I think the biggest problem right now is there's not a lot of capacity in
Mhm.
people for more change. The cognitive load is at people's limits. So whether it's how much is changing at work because of AI and automation and hybrid work, we still
Mhm.
haven't figured out those things. And then you get your macroeconomic forces. We've got the threat of global recessions. We've got unsettled and more global conflict. And so these things are putting a lot of weight on people. And
Mhm.
so to me, it's about the people's individual ability to process that change, I think is the biggest barrier for why we're not seeing more happening in AI.
Yeah. So, to your point, the speed, the scope, the size of the change that we are witnessing and the timing of it as well post COVID is probably a big factor in how all of us are responding to our changing landscape. In this kind of scenario, Gordon, do you see the old change playbooks work, or do we also need to rethink how we support the resistance and adoption curves of employees in work context?
I do think that change management was one of those words that we misused and
Mm.
it got misunderstood. So I go back to like early CIOs. CIO was supposed to be the chief information officer, but often they were managing operations or technologies or data centers. So then when data and analytics grew, everyone's like, what's going on? The CIO said, I'm the information officer. Everyone says, not really. Like we actually misused that name. I think there's other areas like governance and architecture where we kind of misused it. Change management became sort of communications plans and skills based training. I'll teach you how to use this new tool that we're implementing, and I'll teach you how your processes have
Yeah.
changed. That's how it became. That's not how I would. So when you said the old playbooks got to get thrown out, I'm not sure that that's how any change leaders really would have viewed it. I
Mm.
just think that's what it became. I think true change leaders have always known that it's a personalized journey, that we need to really understand people's like challenges and perceptions and then work with them in a very specific way to overcome it and build plans around it. There's a great book, I forgot the author, but it's called Immunity to Change. And in
Yeah.
that, it kind of says, like, the example is, I'm trying to get to my ideal weight. I know why being overweight is not good for me. I want to lose the weight. I have people around me that will support me. There's programs. It's a simple model, but I'm still not doing it. So why do I do things that are counter to what I really want to do? And it comes down to your personal immunity to change. My mind is throwing up things to help me from feeling less uncomfortable. Fear of failure, fear of loss of control, whatever. I'm
Mhm.
doing things that are counterproductive, like eating snacks at night, because I want to feel more comfortable. And so
Mhm.
I think that's where real cognitive behavioral therapists and real change leaders were probably always saying that. I just think in a grand in the grand scale of things, we sort of lost our way around change management and it became more about preparing people for change. I think now we have to go through that process of really understanding how to help guide people. And what I always say when I'm driving big change with clients is I'm going to help your team to behave differently with confidence, because I'm going to teach them, I'm going to guide them, I'm going to mentor them, but I'm going to keep them just on this side of being uncomfortable, that they don't check out, they don't quit, they don't burn it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to help you be uncomfortable in a guided path. And I think that's true change management, and true change leaders would have probably said that's always what it was. So when you say throw out the old playbook, they were like, no, that's what it was. I just think the playbook got messed with by people doing delivery.
Yeah, that is so true. Because from my lived experience, what you said resonates very closely because change was thought of mostly as an afterthought once decisions and choices were made. And then we're like, let's bring people into the new process that we've re engineered or rewired with new technology set. And now let's communicate the why and train them on how to operate in this new way of working versus bringing them up and bringing them along the decisions and choices that were being made early on. So the more we have a balanced approach of top down, bottoms up this time around, which was always true. Like it's understanding human behavior first and understanding the different stakeholders and bringing them and aligning differently. So I really wanted to also double down on the personalization aspect that you brought up. Do you see the resistance, the fear of change, and how people are responding to AI specifically based on where they sit in the generational spectrum as well? Like, do millennials respond differently versus Gen X and Gen Y?
I've recently sort of become quite interested in that generational differences. So what I would say is generations have always had a common lived experience that shaped nuance to that generation, and generations have always had their own unique characteristics, and that's always been true, and I think it's true today. I think that that we need to take a step back and think about everything that's gone on and what millennials who are well into their 40s and Gen Zs and what their lived reality is. And I think one of the big pivots, and this is my thinking, but one of the big pivots was like when I started my career, I had my own lived experiences that were different than the leaders that were driving business. And we all knew about those generational differences, but really the onus was on me to adapt to what they were putting forward. And I think now that's a much greater onus on all of us to understand. And I think part of what Gen Zs, even millennials, are saying is that, they are stamping their feet and saying, these are things that we need and want, and they're voting with, they're changing jobs, they're moving around. So we have to become much more aware. Now, I AI is one thing that's happened to this generation, but I want to conflate it too much. Like technology is a big thing. But if we think about, say, millennials, they're really the first generation that grew up completely globally interconnected. Gen Zs are really the first generation that grew up with this like social media kind of like third destination, third place. So when you look at, say, younger people today, they're much more globally aware than previous generations. And they're much more aware of the good and bad and the politics and the pros and cons of sort of adult issues because it's being, they can't avoid it and they're participating in it. So it's not like they're just, so all those things, I think that there is a desire for Gen Zs, for instance, to seek out meaning and purpose and be at the top of the of Maslow hierarchy than maybe previous generations. And maybe even the base is less secure because of financial security. But that's a common thread that they've seen the best of humanity, the worst of humanity. There's a lot less black box to it, and they're recognizing that purpose and meaning are extremely important.
Yeah.
So I do think, but also at the same time, I'd say there's kind of early adopters and tech savvy people in all generations, and I'd say there are some young people that are really deep into AI and using it many, many, many times a day. And there's others that still aren't. And similarly for boomers, there's people that really embrace it. So again, I get worried about painting like a generational picture. I think there's generational insight that we can get. But I wouldn't say like Gen Zs are faster to pick up AI than, say, all Gen Xs. I don't think that's true. I just think the way they grew up is a very much more enabled, connected, normal for them. And so things that are normal for them may be more of a learning curve for others.
If we look at, like right now we are going through changes because of AI. So if we focus on that for a second, and AI has profound impacts on work. If it's taking away black and white pieces of routine tasks, which were not really, like worthwhile from a human lens because we were not adding value in those tasks because they were mostly rinse and repeat. That also means that nature of work is going to change. The more we have AI integrated into our ecosystems, the more how humans add value to work is going to look and feel very different. And we are so used to getting into a job which has a job description and aligning our work and contributions and how we add value in the domain of that job descriptions. But as the nature of work changes, job descriptions become more fluid. The hierarchy that we are so used to might also disappear or reshape into something else, which we don't know about yet. How do humans find meaning and purpose in this kind of context? Because we were so used to following a routine at work.
Okay. I want to talk. I want to make sure I don't lose the actual question, because I want to give you a bit of context first, but I love that question. However, I would say that's not new, and it's not caused by AI. Like, there was, when my own children were in elementary school and they're graduated university now, there was articles back then about the jobs that they're going to go into don't exist today. And that became shorter and shorter, right? When they started university, they'd say most of these children are going to get jobs in fields or careers that don't exist today. And that was like a 4-year span, right? So those things have been true. I think it was, for a long time, the paradigm was you go to school, then you work, then you enjoy life. And this is not a new concept. It's kind of like that all has to be reshaped. So nobody wants to wait till their end of their life to find meaning and purpose, right? No one wants to do that anymore. At the same time, you can't say your learning stops in your early 20s, and you can't say that your job is stable. I remember reading a report when I was a graduate 30 something years ago. I won't tell anyone the exact number, that said, people expect to have 1 or 2 careers in their year, but this new generation might have 3 or 4. Well, now I think it's like 10 or 12 or something like that. And these are major pivots. They aren't moving from the same job at one firm to the same job at another firm. These are like complete career pivots. So I think all those have been true. And I think the question was, how do you find purpose and meaning? And I feel like there's a really I'm a very optimistic, half full person in general. And I get accused of that a lot. But I feel like there's a real opportunity here to kind of go back to sort of the Renaissance period, where we're encouraging everyone to be whole-mindedness. So you take someone like Da Vinci, who is an artist, but also a scientist, but also a musician. Like, you learn to develop your whole brain. And then they would sit in coffee shops and wax poetic about the future of the world and what could change and what's in the cosmos and what's going on. And I feel like that's where we could get to. We could get to a point where a lot of the things that are doing, and I still believe like 70 to 80% of the work that happens is mundane, not purpose driven. I'm kind of, repetitive, not that interesting, but at least people get it and they're comfortable, but it's not that fun. Right. So if you went to most people and you gave them a lottery amount that was like enough for them to quit work, they would, because they're not really loving work. And I feel like AI can give us the opportunity to say, like, and then, by the way, because everyone became experts, in school and everything, we started streaming people to their area of expertise, like super young. Oh, you're very good at math. Just take math. What about art or drama or music? Nope, math. Oh, you're very good at art and drama. Okay, skip math. You're not good. That's hard. So I feel like what we need to do is encourage people to do the hard things and encourage people to develop lifelong curiosity. That's if we are curious, then we'll be more apt to learn new things, but we'll also be probing and asking tough questions and really thinking about purpose and meaning. Saying, okay, instead of spending most of my time ruminating on how AI is going to change my pattern, potentially threaten my future, like comfort or stability or safety or whatever, I like to think about how AI can free up time for me to think big, bold pictures. And many people agree that while AI will be very good at mimicking like analytical type left brain thinking, that kind of merging of right, left creativity will always be harder for it. And thinking about what hasn't happened. Like right now, LMMs are giving you a summary of what we know, not a summary of what we don't know.
Yeah.
Like if it's never been in the data set, it will not find it. Right. So I personally think there's a huge opportunity where we can start to build our whole-mindedness more, where we can actually spend time thinking about how to make a better future.
Yeah.
And I think it could be not a daunting period, but a very uplifting, purpose-driven, positive time.
Yeah. I agree with you about the opportunity landscape that you've laid out. But I also feel at the same time, this is going to be a hard transition for all of us, because if we look at our organizational context and how we manage performance, how we structure work, I think that creativity and innovation to a great degree has been beaten out of us. Like now we are asking humans to be more humans, but everything in our work context is geared towards pushing us to operate more like machines, be more efficient, have less defects, like your hand gets slapped every time you make a mistake. So is that how you also view that it's going to be a big shift and a lot of hard work, both for organizations to create that context and environment that supports this transition, and on people as well to decondition ourselves?
Yeah, and the normal that you described, like, was the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So that's
Yeah.
where everything became like process driven, step driven, right?
Mhm.
So that's been ingrained for a long time. I would argue,
Yeah.
like, our education system was built for that kind of
Yeah.
normal, and we still haven't really adapted en masse. There's really good, really interesting examples, but not on a grand scale. So I do think that is the world today. Well, let me come back to two things. I will say, even though I'm a very optimistic person, I think the pace of change is only increasing. So that's been true since I was young. I don't see why that wouldn't happen. It does worry me at the pace of the size of the change. And when will we get to the limit of what people can handle? That worries me as a real worry. But I also think my great grandparents were worried about that. I think my great 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 grandparents were worried about that. So I think it's a thing. But on the other side, I'll go back to the comment I made around COVID. It was like that was a massive, massive pivot. And most organizations barely lost any time. They lost like not even a week. So we went from like mostly in-person work where you had to be there. It was very hard to participate by. And if someone dialed in, they were usually kind of not included in the conversation, right? Within a span of a month or two, we figured out that new normal. So I'm not underestimating people's
Mhm.
ability to change. I just think we need to build the muscle for change. We need to build the muscle for curiosity. And I think for most of that time, that previous model was building you to not change. It was building you to get comfortable. You will be an expert in this. Don't
Mm.
worry. Then you can live your expertise. And so I think it's a framework change, but I'm not underestimating what people can do. I think, but also at the same time, is like, I don't know what you're waiting for. Unless you're 75 and massively independently wealthy, I don't see how you can avoid these changes. Like, I
Yeah.
don't see how putting your head in sand is a good model. So I think you got to kind of jump in and give it a shot.
Yeah, yeah. I think the most brilliant thing that happened with AI was that you could, like, this is one piece of software and technology that has been provided access to masses at scale at fraction of the cost. So we all have access to technology. Information is at our fingertips. So there's nothing stopping us from engaging with and at least being curious about what is this thing called AI and how can I do my work differently or better using the technology. But this also speaks to mindset shift. So what would your recommendation be for people who are early on in this journey and are probably wearing the resistor hat right now and they're cynical and skeptical to reframe and rethink their mindset?
That's a really good question. I would have, I would have almost always said for the last 10, 15 years, you got to be curious. You got to
Mm.
get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's the kind of thing I repeat a lot. I think another thing I would do is like probe on your own immunity to change.
Mm.
Why are you resisting change? Try to understand that a lot better and try to create supports and mechanisms to help you work through that change. So I'd say I get more comfortable being uncomfortable. I build the change muscle because it's only going to speed up. I would say get much more curious being curious and recognize all this is non-hierarchical. So you can learn from anyone or anything.
Mm.
And I would dive into the learning of what it can do. I would dive into hands-on. Like I always say, the best learning is hands-on, contextualized. So doing stuff integrated into life and work. So instead of taking you out of work, we're teaching you to do things that are giving you value right away. And then it's blended. There's some asynchronous learning, there's social learning, there's mentor and guide. And that's, as you know, I'm leading this modern government academy offering. That's our three pillars. It's
Yeah.
contextualized, work integrated, and blended. And so I would try to create that around myself if I was anybody going through this change.
Yeah. And we can stitch those three with passion projects and personal creativity as well. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing stopping if you're curious for you to go in, research tools, and create your own e-commerce website. The days of thinking of that as a specialization which exists with a few people, I think we are beyond that. Anybody can jump in and start bringing their ideas to life if technology was a constraint in the past.
Yeah, I love that. But it's really funny I say it because with all these tools, for instance, you could write a book for instance, pretty easily.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that makes you a writer or editor. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? So a friend of mine gave me a book he wrote and I read it and it's got really good insight in it, but it's not a good book to read. And so I would say like it goes beyond that. It's like be curious what goes into the craft of writing. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's hard to become a writer overnight.
Yeah.
That's what people do for a living. It's hard to become an editor overnight, but be curious as to learning the craft because then you might want to say, hey, why don't I partner with a writer and this technology to get something really well done? I think part of the problem is people are saying, I can do this all myself. I can be a great designer. I can get the AI to create a beautiful picture for me. That's not really what went into the craft of design before. That was the
Yeah.
outcome. There was a lot
Yeah.
more to the process. So spending time with people that learned that as a craft and did it for a living, I think, well, that's that kind of being curious that I would really encourage people. I think
Yeah.
this becomes a little bit like I'm going to do it all myself. And there is certainly you can learn a lot on your own too.
Yeah.
But I would encourage that curiousness to learn like what the craft is behind all these things.
Yeah. I love that angle, Gordon, because you're absolutely right. Mid-Journey can generate 50 images for me based on what I ask it to, but the judgment call on which is the best one to pick still needs that specialization or craft or lived experiences to pick one from the 50 that it generated. So
Right.
partnering with an expert definitely is a
And
really
and I
great.
happen to be talking to a designer about AI. And as much as some of these great professional design AI driven tools can help, there's still an element that they add to it.
Yeah.
Right. And then they showed me like this is what the tool created, and then this is how I enhance it. And I'm like, yeah, the enhanced version for me, I don't know why. I can't tell you why. It's just way more appealing. I don't
Yeah.
really know what the tricks you played with lighting and shading and all that kind of stuff. I just
Yeah.
know I really like it better. So there is kind of that too, right? Like don't sell the craft short.
That's right. At the same time, the barrier to entry to just dip your toes into various fields and experiment, that has really become very, very easy in today's time
Right.
and age.
Right. You're right. Like when I was young and I used to code in the very early part of my career, like you needed to know how to code.
Yeah.
And now you can actually ask, an AI tool to write code for you. If you're analytically inclined and you understand logic, you can probably read it and decide if it's doing what you need it to do and how to edit it, but you couldn't have coded it from scratch.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are changing.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was at GE, this was many years ago, they were transitioning from this industrial brand image to a bit more modern, innovative company image. And their tagline was imagination at work. I think the power of imagination is also like a really great superpower for us humans to have, because if we have the imagination, we at least can get started on our journey of experimentation.
Right. And to your point, imagine and experimentation were kind of things that were beat out of us, right? People were not rewarded, and I want to call it for failure because I said fail fast, learn fast. That mantra, I've heard that a million times, and I think it only really applies in like Silicon Valley, where you could hit 1 out of 1,000 and still be a hero, right? In
Yeah,
most corporate worlds, failing once is too much. But what I always said is it's not failure, it's learning quickly. If we did something and figured out that that wasn't the right track, aren't we glad we didn't invest a lot of time into it? Aren't we glad we didn't spend all our calories on it? So this concept of like experimentation and learning and comfort was like not where people went. And
yeah,
that did stifle imagination, creativity, and innovation because what we did was we did what we knew worked, which was the same as what we did before.
yeah, yeah. Change also means a lot of emotional engagement, right? It can affect our mental health and well being as well. So, do you have any tips or tricks or recommendations for people who are going through this change curve and are early on in their journey of accepting the new evolution of work? How do we help them design work life rhythms that support mental well being and intrinsic motivation, regardless of the career stage that they're in?
As the helpers, I think it's really important to be as aware as you can be of where people are on that load. And it could be they're just overwhelmed, they don't have time. Like, but where are they on that kind of checking out versus staying mildly uncomfortable? So we need to monitor that. Like in the past, we do like a change persona and would say, okay, here, this user, we're going to put them all through this. I think we need to look at individuals. Somebody might be dealing with a lot at home, an ailing parent, a sick child. Those things are way heavy on you, on your heart, or your own health problems, right? So that's something very hard to kind of put in the back burner. So we really need to be, as the helpers, aware of people's personal load, and making sure that we're not pushing them over to that point where they're disengaging or they're burning out or they're not connecting. I think there's many changes that have occurred in the workplace. I think people are speaking up more openly about feelings when they feel overwhelmed, how they are. Like, those were not things you could talk about really when I in the very early stages of my career. It's just like, you would have got nothing if you did, and you might have paid a little bit of a price, like that person can't keep up, or they're just not cut for us, or we're gonna. So there was no encouragement. So I think we open the door to enable people. When we start a lot of our projects that I work on, we have a meeting with our team and say, how's everyone doing, what's going on that we should all be aware of. What are you trying to get out of this? What's your work style going to be? We basically talk to them about how much energy do they have for, and we try to adapt the work around it. Like, that's a very new thing. So I think on the person side, you need to speak up. You need to understand your own immunity to change, what's getting in the way of change. You need to know when you're getting close to your barriers, and you need to start to try to build that muscle for change and curiosity. And on the helper side, we need to be more attuned to that. We need to be aware of it, and we need to nudge people with small steps so that they're behaving differently at the end. But we need to be really careful about stacking those nudges.
Yeah, yeah. Let's zoom into the helper or organizational side of things. We've talked about what we can do as individuals to support us through this change journey, to find meaning and purpose in the new world of work. What should organizations be thinking about or doing differently to support this transition? Because, if we look at traditional HR practices, do you see them still relevant in today's context and the context of the future, or should we be thinking about evolving those as well?
Okay, well, that's two different questions I think are very loaded. Everything, including HR practices, should be evolving. And I think we're not quite evolving fast enough. And it's interesting because HR professionals have the same challenges. They're not necessarily better at change than other people. So even if you're a change champion going through your own change, you have your own barriers. The evolution needs to happen. I think, as I've said, we need to be much more cognitively aware of how individuals are doing, and we need to put in these programs of small steps, we call it, and bigger, more formal leaps that are nudging people, and we need to provide them with the supports and the learning in the flow work to guide them to behaving in a different way. So I think the way we do it has to change.
Yeah.
And I think it's everyone's responsibility. I'm not sure that the business side can say, HR, take my people through change. I think it's HR has its own domain of expertise. They might know the frameworks, the methods, the tools, the approaches. But it's hard, even as an HR business partner, for instance, it's still hard to be as close to the people on the ground as the people on the ground. So it's a different partnership. I think it might be less over the wall than it used to be.
Yeah.
HR will take care of these activities, and then these activities are over here. I think we need to be more connected and blended when we deliver.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot because, if we look at, I'll take one example, like performance management. It is a very not, or I should say, it's not the most favorite processes that HR teams run in the business, but that process doesn't seem to be relevant in the modern context of work, or it has to evolve. And how do we evolve that process, which anyways has not been working, and it's the most dreaded process for all parties involved, for employees, for managers, for HR people. And this is a great opportunity for both business and HR and employees who are in this mix, all stakeholders to come together to redesign what does performance, I wouldn't even call it management, but performance enablement in the new context of work looks like.
Right. 100%.
Yeah. All right. So in our last segment, as we wrap up our thoughts today, beyond tactics, how should we redefine our relationship with work as AI becomes more like a normal teammate? What would your suggestion be? We are still in very early stages of this transformation. There's a lot of noise around AI. I don't know how much of that is actually translated into action in work context, but still, given that we are at early stages, how should we look at our relationship with work?
Let me ask the AI and then the relationship with work, because it's not the exact same answer, but One of the things that I think is really great about what's happening around AI is that there's been since the outset a real focus on the ethical use, the appropriate use, governed use in a not, sometimes it can be getting in the way of like adoption, like as a barrier,
Mhm.
right? And we've seen that with new technologies in the past. With cloud, it was always like, oh, data residency will be a problem. Or with blockchain, there was always a different issue. But I think that we are very consciously trying to be very thoughtful and purposeful about what's the right way to use these tools, to engage with these tools, to leverage these tools. At EY, we have a lot of great enablement and training and all different stuff. And I've involved in a lot of it, but there's also a lot of guidance around what it is and what it can't do and how do you use it properly. And so that part I think is really interesting. I do think that AI will change everything, and we need to kind of start to embrace and look for those opportunities to leverage and grow, whether it's a big opportunity, but even if it's little things. I happened to be sitting out in the open area at work the other day, talking to some younger, relatively new grads, like interns and people that have been out for 2, 3 years. And we had a long conversation about how do we all use AI. And it was interesting because it really wasn't generational. Like some heavy users were young, some heavy users were older, but it was just how are we doing it? What are you getting from it? What are the things you got to be worried about? So we all know that critical thinking is really important, like
Yeah.
challenging and questioning. You know, these things that Michael Fulon's a very prolific writer on education in Canada, and he created a 6C model. I saw another one that was like 8Cs, but it's these enduring competencies: communication, critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, compassion, composure, those types of things that you never really master in your life. Like you can always go back and take a course on those things.
Hmm.
But those things are going to be extremely important as we go forward. How to challenge the critical thinking, like this is what the ad produced. Is it right? Is it make
Mhm.
sense? Is it right for this context? Do I need to prompt it with a different question? Did I ask the wrong question? So if you're using Gen AI. So I think those, are we need to be less, we need to challenge orthodoxy more. We need to get more comfortable with change. We need to build that muscle for change, and we need to be a lot more curious. But we also really got to focus on those like 8Cs or 6Cs, whatever model you want to find, and really continue to build those things. Instead of go to school, work, and enjoy, we got to always go to school, and we got to
Yeah.
always be working, and nobody wants to wait to enjoy. And so that's how we got to change the relationship with work. I think AI is the current thing right in front of us. I actually am nervous that it will be not the big thing in like a very short order. There'll be other stuff. But I think, yeah, it's about getting curious and starting to think about how can we apply it, even in small ways. How do we change what we're doing on a daily basis? And sharing and learning that together. That's one thing that I think UI does. We have a mantra called Client Zero. We're trying to show everyone that we're doing it ourselves to ourselves first. And we spend a lot of time. We just had a really interesting kind of like big event where you could just kind of come in and talk to people, and there were stations all set up and you could get all these demos of what people are doing with it. And I walked out of there. First of all, I left early because I was overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my God, I got too many ideas from this meeting. Too many. I went and sent a whole bunch of emails like, show me that, send me that. That was awesome. So that's that kind of like really being curious is what we need to change.
Yeah, yeah. And you said something there when you were talking about the 6Cs, that if you get an output from AI, challenge it, work
Right.
with it instead of just taking it, is so powerful, because that also is new reframing, that don't think about AI just as a tool. It's an intelligence at the end of the day. It might not be like human intelligence, but treat it like intelligence and play with it and hone your 6Cs or 8Cs that you talked about. That
Like I said, if Gen AI, which is what we're kind of talking about,
Mhm.
is working off some sort of data set that represents what we know today, then it's our responsibility to challenge what's for the future. Like,
Yeah.
what haven't we asked? What hasn't been thought about? And that's when I keep going back to like the Renaissance around. We've developed whole-mindedness because it created more thinking. Like all those scientists were not naturally great artists or vice versa. That's not how it happened. They were just taught to build whole-mindedness, but then they were very much encouraged to like think outside the box. And that's where I think the real fun and purpose can come in.
Yeah. Think outside the box. What a great way to wrap up our conversation today, Gordon. Thank you so much for your
Uh,
time.
Thank you, Shveta. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed our conversations as always. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. And you've left us a lot to think about and work with. So thank you. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to Tides. As AI transforms the way we work, one true north remains, which is our purpose and the connections we build along the journey. So if today's conversation inspired you, subscribe for more stories and insights and share your thoughts with our community. And let's create a future of work where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading with intention and heart.